Hey everyone, this is Coach Patrick from Marathon Nation, and I'd like to welcome you to our marathon pacing webinar. It's June 30th. It's a Wednesday night here, beautiful night in Boston. Hopefully great where you are as well. And I'm excited to have you here. Almost 100 people registered for this event, which really speaks to the power not only of social media, but the interest in what we're talking about inside Marathon Nation. Hopefully, I can give you some information that's really going to empower you to become a better runner, and not just from a fitness perspective, but from an execution perspective. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between fitness and execution. While I have your attention, pardon my sales pitch, I'll tell you about Marathon Nation. We're an online community of runners who train for both marathon and half marathon distances. People run other races in between, but that's our primary focus. We have training plans online that are built around the principles you'll see discussed tonight: training with pace, race execution. We have forums that are open all the time, pretty lively forums, people asking each other questions, supporting one another. Best part about that is, of course, everyone's on the same plan. So when you have a question about week 2's tempo workout, someone's already done it, and they can speak directly to you. It's a very open sharing space. We've had a lot of great resources come in, and members are already creating their own resources, doing some great stuff like creating their own sweat rate calculator and so on. So things are kind of taking on a life of their own. We've been sort of in hiding in beta, and we go live on July 5th, which means as of July 5th, anyone can sign up anytime. We've got a lot of cool stuff going on inside the house. We've got 5 key races for this fall, including the Marine Corps, Philadelphia, New York. I'm missing one there, and the Disney, the Goofy double thing. We're going to do that as well, which means there'll be people there doing the races. We'll have race captains there, and if I get permission from the boss, I may even be there myself. So very exciting stuff. Really cool to watch people come together and grow and learn as a community. That's sort of what we're all about. So with that said, let's get underway, okay? Tonight, this is what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about race execution. I mentioned earlier, not just talking about fitness, but about execution, how you take the fitness you have, whether you follow the guidance that we talk about or you follow your own plan. There's a difference between fitness and execution. We'll cover that tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about how you determine your running fitness. A lot of people don't know. A lot of people consider themselves fit because of what they can do in their local run around the lake, or what the scale tells them. That seems to be a marker of fitness. We think of it differently, and we'll talk about that tonight. We'll also talk about how you can take that fitness, that understanding, and calculate a predicted race time. Not your final race time. If I had that, I'd bottle it and be a millionaire. But a predicted race time for you, which is a great place to start, and which, as we'll find out, is a much better place to start than just asking your training partners what they plan on running and then just training with them and hoping you run it as well. We're going to talk about how you test that pace, your predicted time, in a race simulation workout. We'll talk loosely about what the definition of a good run is, what a good marathon run is. We've all had good times in a race, but some of those races haven't been good themselves. We've suffered to the end or not, so we'll talk about that. I'll give an example of some do's and don'ts. I've got a great visual image some of you may have already seen, of what it means when you go out too fast in a marathon. And you obviously have some of your own stories and memories as well. And then I'll talk a little bit about the nuances of running with pace as I close things out. There's definitely some details in terms of running with pace. And as I said before, a lot of what I'll talk about here is very macro level, 30,000 foot, may not apply directly to you where you are right now at day 37 of your training plan. We can elicit that in the Q&A and go into that, on Twitter, on the blog, whatever it is. But do give me some flexibility. I couldn't be as detailed as I wanted, just by virtue of the setup here, okay? So, so what we're not going to cover, we're not going to talk about your training zones. I'm not going to get into that at all. That's resources that we have inside the house, along with how to train with pace. Those are part of our training plans, and that's inside the house as well. I'm not going to talk about how to get detailed into your testing or how to taper, what you want to do in the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks, etc. And so as a result, again, bear with me as I try and stay as focused as I can, as condensed as possible, okay? So let's talk quickly about the racing principles, how we inside Marathon Nation think about your race, okay? we think about three key things: train to race, run to the line, race to the finish, okay? Starting with day one of your training, we begin thinking about what you're going to be doing on race day. In other words, we start targeting your training to the pace that you want to system race day. And we use Jack Daniels, that legendary running coach's VDOT formula to calculate those paces. We've massaged them a little bit inside the house, but basically from day one you started to engage that process. Can contrast that with the athlete who a couple of weeks before the race looks at their last long run and says, oh wow, I did 18 or 20 miles and I did it at this pace. I totally can break 3 hours in my next marathon. I'm great. That's a little more rolling the dice. Not such a fan of that. So we start right from day one training to race. On race day, we run to the line. By that means we're trying to basically set ourselves up for success. The last 6 miles is really a challenge, as Thomas mentions in the question box here. The last 6 miles really get a lot of people, and we create conditions for success in those last 6 miles by what we do before we get to that point, before we get to the line, wherever that line is for you on the day. Some folks hit it at late teens, some folks hit it at 19, 20, 22. Some folks may never hit it, but we want to create the conditions for success there. And finally, we race to the finish. So when it gets hard, because it's going to get hard, it's a marathon. That's the whole point, right? It's difficult. It's a challenge. We're trying to challenge ourselves. It's a physical and mental obstacle that we need to overcome, and you need to be ready to get it done. And part of it's physical in terms of how you prepared. Part of it's physical in terms of how you execute. Part of it's mental. Can you really handle, what you need? Can you really stand up to your body? And when it's saying, you've had me out here too long, I want to stop, can you really stand up and force it to say, all right, I'm going to keep going because this is right. This is what we want to do. It's a very difficult place to be, okay? So let's go to the next slide here. Pace selection steps. So talking about starting from day one. How do we start on day one? Well, inside Marathon Nation, we use a 5K test as our fitness benchmark. I encourage people to go out and find a simple flat place they can run. They can repeat the test frequently because the first couple times they're not going to get it just right. And the idea is you're going to run a 5K test the best of your ability, and then you go ahead and you determine your VDOT. Now, members can use the pro system that we have on the site. Non-members can use this other site that I've linked here. And again, you'll have those resources when I send you the PDF, probably tomorrow. I think the system sends it to you. So you enter your 5K time, and you get a VDOT for that time. You take that VDOT and you go to the pace chart. And based on that pace chart, you'll have a sense of what you can actually do on race day. Okay, and you're gonna pick a number, what we call calibration factor, basically, of your VDOT, because a 5K time is really not going to correlate to your marathon time. There's a huge gap there. So we have a correlation factor that we like you to basically subtract from your VDOT. So if I go out and do a 5K test and my VDOT is C, my marathon is going to be 50 minus a certain number based on how I feel. We'll get into that later, okay? So we're going to select that, okay, I call it an accuracy factor here, but calibration factor as well, to pick that optimal pace. And you pick that optimal pace based on both your previous experiences as well as some of your longer effort runs. And I definitely encourage you to be as conservative as possible. I see Steve's asking if a longer run, like a 10K, is more accurate. A longer run absolutely is more accurate. The longer the run can be, the more accurate it is. So, if you did a marathon 3 months ago, the VDOT for that marathon is probably a lot closer to your next marathon than a 5K test might be. But that said, the longer the run gets, the bigger a hole it punches in your training plan. It takes away from the work that we're asking you to do on a regular basis. So for those of you following a training plan in the throes of marathon training, a 5K test is good enough. And this, what I have lined up here for you tonight, will help you manage those numbers. And then finally, number 5 here, we take that number and we push that into a race simulation run. We actually put it to the test. Is it too easy? Is it too hard? How does it feel? Okay, so to recap, we do a test. We take from that test, we get a VDOT. We take that VDOT, we calibrate it, we put it into the accuracy factor chart here, we mix it up, figure out what's an optimal pace for us, and then we test that in a run. That's a lot of thinking right there. I want to just pause for a second and have you absorb that. That's a lot different than being in an expo, seeing a dude handing out timing bands, buying one and putting it on your wrist that says you're going to run a 4-hour marathon, that says you've got to run X minutes per mile, and just repeat that 26.2 times, and you've earned your time. This is very different. There's a little bit more thought going into it, You really have to start doing it with your training. So just something to think about. There is a little bit of mental weightlifting here, if you will, as you go. So the pace selection guidance, okay? I mentioned briefly before about that adjustment factor. What does it mean? So for a marathon, the adjustment factor is about -2.5 points on your VDOT. Okay, the 20-mile factor is about -2, half marathon is about -1.5, 10 miles are about -1. So what this means again is, for those of you doing the math at home, if my VDOT is 50, then the pace that I'll be targeting in a marathon is roughly about